David, do you think the continuous hiking of the repo rates, as we've seen done by the Reserve Bank, do you think it's had the desired effect?
On inflation? Well, look, I think inflation seems to be stabilizing, but bear in mind that basic foodstuffs and particularly the goods that the poor rely on, we're still seeing very high inflation there. I think that's around 11%. So that really is a big driver of the deterioration of living conditions and just general anxiety and malaise that exists in the South African economy.
And how hard has that been on businesses?
Well, look, it's been very difficult. Businesses are operating in an increasingly challenging environment. There's load shedding. So, for example, in March of this year, MTN reported that it had spent 695 million rand just on maintaining its cell phone network through diesel generators and batteries. So those are the kinds of costs and the scale that many businesses are having to deal with in South Africa. We're now seeing this partnership initiative between big business and government, where business is offering to essentially fix some of the problems that were created by the government in the first place. And I recently gave a speech where I said that business actually needs to stop with this consensus-seeking approach and abandon the so-called social compacting and start actually realizing its negotiation position and its power and start negotiating with government rather than seeking consensus all of the time.
So Reich says that, it's an exciting development, the privatisation of Transnet or of this section of the Durban harbour. But this weekend we saw the ANC Secretary-General, Fikile Mbalula, send a warning to Minister Pravin Gordhan to say, get trucks off the road, fix Transnet. Are you concerned that political infighting might hamper further processes or attempts rather at privatisation?
Well, yes, I think it is a major stumbling block. And look, Mr. Mbalula presided over the Transport Ministry for many years, so perhaps he should, examine his own track record in that sense. But look, I think broadly speaking, the government is ideologically hostile to the notion of privatisation. Privatisation is being almost thrust upon them by necessity because all of these state-run assets are essentially collapsing under the weight of poor management, lack of available financing and corruption. So really, actually, until there is a wholesale embracing of privatisation, which I don't expect anytime soon, we're going to still see this resistance. And I think SAA, the Post Office, are very good examples of not acknowledging the reality that these entities are essentially no longer functioning. And so what we would rather see is an orderly privatisation process that still preserves what value remains in those assets, rather than a last-minute selling off, a fire sale, where essentially all of the value has evaporated.
But you talk about that hostility between the private sector, or rather from government towards the private sector. Recently, we saw the CEO of Pick n Pay, Gareth Ackerman, coming out quite strongly in terms of crime, load shedding, various other challenges facing businesses. Do you think that's the way to go? What effect will those statements by business leaders have? Do you think government listens?
Look, I think it's very important that business raises its voice. I mean, we saw Magda Vizitska talking about the risk of a failed state. Ralph Mupita from MTN, he made similar comments earlier in the year around March when those results were delivered. Fani Titi as well from Investec, he said that government is disorganized, totally disorganized. But I think that tends to focus on the symptoms rather than the underlying causes. The underlying cause is our poor policy framework. And so what we as the Free Market Foundation would like to see is business recognizing that actually some of the policy proposals that are on the table, including the National Health Insurance, expropriation without compensation, Employment Equity Amendment Act, these are fundamentally hostile to a market economy and to economic freedom in South Africa. We need more economic freedom. So whilst I welcome and applaud those kinds of comments from Mr. Ackerman, we would like to see them going a step further and saying, government, we need to see fundamental reforms, and we will only work with you if you provide those reforms. Right now, business is behaving like it is the weaker party in this negotiation process. It is in fact the government that is the weaker party. Government needs business, not the other way around.
David, so Reich referred to the announcement last week that the Russian President Vladimir Putin is not coming to South Africa to attend the BRICS summit. Do you think that's enough to save the AGOA deals we have in place with the USA?
Look, I think it'll be a very close call. Bear in mind that there have been long-term calls for reviewing South Africa's position within AGOA. That is legislation within the US Congress. It's not a trade agreement. So that is at the whim and the behest of the American government that we're included there. But I think this episode, maybe you could say that we got away with a bit of a close shave. But I think it sends entirely the wrong message to our allies in the United States and in Europe. These are our principal trade partners. We are, I think, again, putting ideology before pragmatism. We, as the South African government, are choosing to align with the erstwhile allies from the Cold War days and not really seeing South Africa's interests in an objective way. So Charles de Gaulle, the one-time French president, he said that countries don't have friends, they have interests. So I think South Africa's international relations needs to get a lot more strategic. Doesn't mean we can't bargain with these various actors and play one off against the other. But this whole episode, to me, just seems like a bit of an own goal.
David Drake, baie dankie.